So let's take a look at this. This is a commercial for Apple Macintosh computers from 1984. This commercial ran one time during the Super Bowl in 1984, and it had a profound impact. If you ask advertising executives today what is the most important television commercial of all time, they say the 1984 commercial by Apple. And here are some reasons why. Let's watch the commercial first, and then we'll watch some discussion about that commercial.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of a contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So we can look at that from a literal perspective. If we look at this from a literal perspective, what do we see? From a literal perspective, we see a group of men dressed in prison gray with a bluish shade on the visuals of the film. They're marching through some kind of tunnel or tube or hallway in what appears to be a futuristic setting. They march into an auditorium where very similar looking men are seated looking at a giant black and white screen in which someone is addressing them. Then we also see what appear to be security guards in riot gear chasing after a young woman who stands out not just because she's a young woman, but because of the color that pops out on her costume. All right, she's a vision of bright life in this dreary grayish blue world. All right, and she runs carrying this hammer. And then suddenly she stops and throws the hammer through a giant screen. There's an explosion, and the reaction shots, the faces on the men who are sitting there in these gray prison type uniforms are like their heads explode. They're blown away. Right? Can I do an effect on that? Not on this program. Sorry. Otherwise, I would do a visual effect. But I didn't plan that ahead for this discussion. So that is looking at it from a literal perspective. Okay, so we see things literally. Those are the things we see. Now, if we look at it from a textual perspective, what is the text we're seeing? What is the story we see here? It appears to be that this young woman is running through some kind of prison, possibly an indoctrination center, where these men are being brainwashed to think alike, all right? And she throws this hammer, which might be a metaphor, through a screen, which means disrupting what? Disrupting the status quo, disrupting the world as it is being fed to them. A revolutionary, an iconoclast, someone who shatters icons, but a revolutionary, someone who's breaking through the conventions. So we see her do this, and then we see what appears to be liberated minds, people who are set free from this indoctrination. Right? So that is a textual analysis, a very quick textual analysis. I'm just giving an example. From an intertextual perspective, we look at this as what? We look at this as reminiscent of the book 1984 by George Orwell. In the year 1984, all Americans were required to read that book in high school. All right? It was probably the most famous 20th century dystopian novel. And there's an overarching character named Big Brother who is a benevolent dictator. And so this character uses propaganda to brainwash the citizens, all right, and uses technology to monitor the citizens, to keep an eye on everything. There's a famous line, Big Brother is watching. And so this commercial is very much reminiscent of that. If we look at it from an intertextual basis, this commercial, directed by Ridley Scott, a famous director, was designed to do exactly that, to make us think of 1984. And then in the text at the end of the commercial, Apple actually says, 1984 won't be like 1984. So that was the message. And we'll watch this other video on its impact on not only Apple, but also on the Super Bowl and advertising in general. So we can look at these things from those perspectives. And if we look at it from a mythical perspective, we look for elements related to myths or sacred stories. A myth doesn't necessarily mean something is untrue. It means it's a sacred story, something that we hold close to ourselves, either as a society or as individuals. And what are some common themes from sacred stories that we see here? How about the myth of one hero overcoming great odds to defeat an adversary that's not beatable? Theseus defeating the Minotaur, David versus Goliath, Luke Skywalker blowing up the Death Star. Here we see one woman single-handedly defeating an evil dictator. So this commercial fits in with our mythology, and that's another way to look at it.